Welcome back to another episode of Historical Horrors. My name is Christy Clark, and thank you so much for tuning in this week. This week, we're going to be talking about a high school. Now, what's creepier than a haunted high school? I don't know. That sounds like hell to me. But this high school has a lot of cool history about it that dates all the way back to 1891. So in Pocatello, the people wanted to build this magnificent high school that would be like the first high school for the first school district in Idaho. So it's Pocatello District 1, and they wanted to build a huge high school to kind of commemorate that. So it's 1981. It's 1891, and officials buy 90,000 square feet of land, and it was an entire city block, and it's located between Arthur and Garfield. And do you want to know how much this 90,000 square foot plot of land cost? $745. So they start building in 1891, and by 1892 it is complete. It's called the West Side School, and it was originally a K-12 school. As was common in rural communities, you kind of had all of the grades in one building. This school looks like a university building. It kind of looks like the administration building on UIdaho's campus. It's huge, and if you Google it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. This building was so big that they used it as town square. They had concerts there, athletic events. It was a very impressive building for the time. 2 different presidents even spoke at this school. Theodore Roosevelt and William Taft both gave speeches in the school. But like all grand Idaho buildings that have been featured on this podcast, some natural disaster has to occur and the building has to burn down. In December of 1914, the building burnt to the ground due to, there was a pile of materials in the boiler room, or in the furnace room, and the furnace was sparking and it caught on fire. So it was December 16th, and if any of you live in Idaho, you understand that it is freezing in December. In the reports, it was 0 degrees for most of the day. The janitors were having a really hard time trying to keep the building warm, so the furnace was being worked really hard, which eventually led to the creation of the fire. Thankfully, the students were released for lunch, so at 11:45 a.m., classes were dismissed, and everyone kind of went off to lunch. There were some students and teachers that stayed behind, and actually in my notes, it says, except the students who came in on the school wagon. So all of the students went home except for the kids that were on the school wagon. In the article, it says that the fire started around 12:15 p.m. And I actually found an excerpt by Cora Jones. She's a 1915 graduate, so she was attending the school at the time of the fire. And she wrote, "At first, we were elated over the prospects of a 2 weeks vacation." And what she means by that is that they were about to go on Christmas break. Because remember, it's December 16th, so they were about to go on Christmas break, so they thought that the fire was going to extend their Christmas break. Okay, back to the quote. "Instead of the 8 days allotted to us, visions of smoked walls, disarranged pictures, and water-soaked books soon vanished as we looked upon the clouds of smoke issuing from the doors and windows and finally making their way through the roof. Rescuing corps of men and high school boys saved valuable records from Superintendent Snyder's office in the middle of the building, while another group secured machines, cooking utensils, and exhibited works from the household arts room in the south wing. A third group carried out some of the apparatus from the physical laboratories and the typewriters from the commercial room in the north wing. Suddenly, there was a great crash. We knew the assembly floor had fallen. The roof burst into flames. They leapt their way up the tower. The flag waving above slowly fell into the burning mass and was gone. The onlookers were hushed with awe when the great bell tottered and its clapper rolled its farewell as it fell to the ground. When dusk fell, only the shell of the broken windows and tall chimneys remained, a gruesome outline against the dark sky." That was a very dramatic interpretation of the events that happened, but I do have a funnier one. So there was one student, her name is Mae Norris Myers, and she told her side of things. So she wrote for a senior citizens publication that was published fairly recently. And she said that Mr. Egbert, the driver of the canvas-covered school wagon, was 2 hours late. The once warm bricks for our feet were now cold, our lunches frozen. It was a relief to see the gray stones of the East Side School. From here, we walked across the viaduct to Pocatello High. It was already 11 o'clock. At noon, Lucy Tanney and I shared our lunch in a second-floor classroom. Then Lucy went to buy a Denver Post for her father, but I had to finish a map for Mr. Van Dyke's class. I heard the door close as Lucy left. I didn't pay any attention when Norma Hewlett put her head in and screamed, "Get out! The school's on fire!" Norma is always playing jokes, I thought, and continued coloring. Then a bright flash drew my attention. As I looked out the window, the flames leaped toward the sky. Grabbing my books and Lucy's, I hurried into a cloud of gray smoke, groped my way down the stairs. My throat was dry and my eyes burned. I found our coats and boots, more instinct than sight, and I floundered toward what I thought to be the outside door. I pumped into the large water fountain as I clung to it, trying to get my bearings. 2 strong arms circled my small frame, wraps, books, boots, and all. We were soon in the open air, and I thanked the man the best I could. How did he know I was there? Miss Wood stood at an upper window, screaming frantically. She had some test papers to grade. We convinced her to throw them down. I gathered them as they fell and presented them to her on her safe arrival. She gave me an F on the test. She could have done better than that after what I did for her. A crowd gathered to watch the horse-drawn fire wagon spray water over the burning building. Students and spectators alike were crying. Everyone stood with bowed heads as the big bell fell from its tower. Okay, the student May Myers, I totally relate with her, because I would be that petty and remember that my teacher failed me after I saved all of the grades. That's just, I loved that story when I found it. I was like, I have to include that in the podcast. That's hilarious. I mean, obviously the building burning down, definitely did burn down, is not funny, and no one died, so it's fine. But the F was really funny, and I had to share that. It took the city 3 years to rebuild, and the students had to meet in different locations to continue classes. So they met in churches and just different buildings around town. In 1917, the school reopened. In addition to it reopening, they also added different wings to the building. So during the rebuild, they built the West Wing, and then they also added a second story in 1920, and then they ended the long end wings in 1939. So they've really been building and building on this school for decades. When the Depression hit, they were also building. So they worked on the gymnasium and the auditorium. They were WPA projects during the Depression years. The district didn't raise enough money, and they didn't even have a cafeteria until 1947. Now for the ghost of the building. So apparently in the 1930s to 1950s, there wasn't an exact date. Those are just the ranges. So 1930s to 1950s, there were 2 girls that allegedly had a suicide pact. They were supposed to hang themselves in the school, but apparently only one of the girls went through with it, and she hanged herself on her locker. Now, the locker is supposed to have a really strong perfume scent that is supposed to be her scent. I read that apparently it was so pungent, the scent was, that the locker had to be replaced because of students complaining about the scent. Other people have reported seeing an apparition of a young girl wandering the hallways, and they believe that it is the girl that allegedly went through with the suicide pact. There's also apparently a librarian that still haunts the building. So her story is that the librarian's fiance left her. I read it both at the altar and then just left her in general, but the altar is a little bit more dramatic. She was left at the altar, and apparently she hung herself on the library's chandelier. So now there is a figure of a woman that you can see in the window of the library, and that's supposed to be her. There's also another story of a wet boy. So students are claiming that they see a kid that's drenched walking around the outside of the school and around the halls. The story with that is that apparently there was a pool in the building at one point. I couldn't find any information that actually proved that, so I'm gonna say that this one's probably not accurate, but apparently there was a student that drowned in one of the pools, and now apparently he haunts the building. There's also a maintenance worker that swore that he saw a coworker after they passed away. So he was walking by, and he was really shocked to see this person because they're supposed to be dead. And so apparently you can see a man walking around. He was seen at the top of the auditorium or in the theater area, which is supposed to be really haunted. As a theater kid myself, I have some stories of our auditorium, and we had this creepy old back hallway that was only allowed for theater students. We kept all of our extra props and different things like that up there. and it was the creepiest. Like, it was so creepy to be in there. I hated being there alone. There was a lot of like hidden areas that only theater kids had access to. Maybe one day I'll do some stories of like my own personal experiences in my high school. I also work at a daycare now that I definitely think is haunted, and a lot of my coworkers have stories as well, so maybe I can pull one of the girls to come and talk about the different experiences that they've had at the daycare. Future episodes, guys. I'm working on it. The building also has a lot of like lights flickering. Alarms will randomly go off for about 30 seconds around midnight near the old gymnasium, and then also toilets will flush by themselves, and then you'll hear water running in empty restrooms. So you'll hear water running, you go check it out, and there's no one in there. So there's like a lot of that. Like, I think that's probably the most that happens in the school is like the lights flickering and all of that stuff. There's also a story of 2 investigators. They were walking around doing an investigation, and they felt like they were getting hugged by an entity, and they were really confused by it. So they went to a local historian who confirmed, well, he just speculated that it was probably this young man that he had known when he went to Pocatello High School. So this man loved to hang out and watch basketball games, and he would hang out in the gym. He loved the high school, and he went to a college that was not too far from the high school, so probably Idaho State University, ISU. It's in the same town. And so he would greet his friends with a warm hug. He was tall, and his head would usually rest on people's shoulders, and that was kind of like a similar sensation that they felt. So the historian was like, yeah, it has to be him. The young man that we're talking about, when he went off to college, he actually committed suicide at college, and apparently his spirit has returned to Pocatello High School, and he still watches the basketball games and all of that. So that's kind of a nice, uplifting ghost story. Now, this high school is actually like, it's been investigated a lot, and I'm pretty sure it was like Ghost Adventures or one of those big TV shows covered Pocatello High School. And apparently during an investigation, some of the team members lost some of their equipment, and a week later, it was found on this really high up windowsill that you needed a ladder to get to. So it like wasn't them. And I guess a maintenance worker found it and returned it. So he had to get a ladder and get it down and returned it to the team. So like I said, theater students, teachers, and janitors, the people that are there after hours, they have experiences with a lot of different activity that's happening in the school. So there's like dark shadows that will be seen a lot in like the rafters, voices, pianos playing when nobody's there to play them, the feeling of being watched or someone being behind you and there's no one around. So it's very common for people that are there after hours to experience things. And probably the most interesting part of this story is that in December of 2014, there was video footage that started circulating around nationally. It went viral, essentially. There was this school surveillance tape from Pocatello High School that literally shows like this clearish being walking from the bathroom out and then like back, and so just kind of back and forth between the bathroom and the water fountain. Now, a lot of people absolutely love this footage. They think that it is the real deal, that it is like probably some of the best footage of a ghost ever, but then a lot of people are like, it's just cobwebs, like, you know, it could be easily explained, but a lot of people really think that this is the real deal. And I kind of think that it's the real deal because you see this thing walk back and forth, and then all of a sudden the lights go out. And there was so much activity with the lights that like the police were called because someone thought that there was someone in the closed building, and there was absolutely no one in the building. So like, yeah, it's all fine and dandy for it to be a cobweb, but how do you explain all of the lights going off and the police having to come and investigate and search the building because people thought that there were people in the building? And now we're in the part of the episode where I also go over people trying to disprove the entities in the stories. So there was a teacher, and he confirmed that like the librarian story just isn't true because the chandelier wasn't added until 1974, and there have been no deaths reported in the school. So that debunked the librarian and the suicide pact. But he does think that the building is still haunted. So even though he knows that no one like died in the building, like he definitely thinks that something's happening. And he wrote, In all those years when I was working there late at night with a few other teachers and some students, many strange things happened. We heard bumps and noises. Though I wouldn't say it wasn't haunted, I never experienced anything scary or unsettling. I will leave a link to the video that I was talking about earlier, the video from 2014. I'll leave a link in the show notes so that you guys can watch it and let me know what you think of it. Just send me a message. You can message me on Facebook. You can find the page at Historical Horrors. I also have Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, so you can tweet me or DM me at Historical H Pod. And then also Instagram is at the same handle at Historical H Pod. And I have a Patreon now. It's official. It is there. I'll put the link to the Patreon account in the show notes, but also if you just type in Historical Horrors, you'll find me. I have a lot of fun and exciting content that I will be putting into the Patreon, and exclusively for the Patreon, I have an interview set up with the Palouse Paranormal Society. I am going to be doing video content and different ghost stories, personal experiences. All of that's going to be in the Patreon. So if you want to hear more from me, go ahead and support the show, follow the Patreon, and get some cool content with it. Also, thank you for bearing with my voice this week. I've been sick for like 2 weeks, and it's been awful. Thankfully, I pre-recorded some episodes, so by my next episode, hopefully I'll feel better and I stop talking so low and just gravelly and ugh. It's gross. I know. I'm sorry. Bear with me. I'll get better soon. But that's about it from me. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. You guys have been amazing. Like, people have been messaging me and asking me questions about the different stories and if I'd heard about this on campus and like all of these fun things. And I'm having so much fun making these. So please support the show, and I will see you guys next week with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening. Bye.